Charleston summers had a way of masking discomfort with charm. The manicured gardens, the clink of crystal glasses under magnolia trees, the hush of wealth so old it no longer needed to introduce itself. And at the center of it all, Charlotte Carlyle. She stood at the edge of the veranda, her hand resting gently on the curve of her stomach. 7 months. The silk gown hugged her figure, elegant in a way that told others not to ask the price. Down below, music from the garden party wafted up, polite laughter following. Charleston's finest had gathered for yet another evening of soft jazz and louder gossip. Charlotte smiled, but only with her lips. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Your guests are asking about you," came Sterling's voice, polished and precise. Her husband always spoke like someone in a press interview, measured, public. She turned, the glow from the chandelier catching the diamonds at her throat. "I'll be down in a moment." He paused, eyes scanning her like a checklist. "You look tired. Try not to let it show." Then he walked away without another word. Charlotte's fingers curled tighter around the champagne flute she wasn't drinking from. She hadn't touched alcohol in months, but Sterling insisted she carry it. Appearance was everything. From the garden below, a woman laughed just a little too loudly. Charlotte didn't need to look to know it was Aubrey McCall. Young, blonde, ambitious. Her name had started surfacing more often than it should. Event planning, supposedly, but even Charleston's gossip tended to whisper when it came to the Carlisses. She set the glass down and stepped inside. Their home was a converted carriage estate just outside the historic district. High ceilings, aged wood, heirlooms in every corner. Sterling loved heritage, especially when it was his. She walked past a gallery wall of portraits, his ancestors, all staring as if guarding a legacy she would never be part of. The hallway was quiet, empty, except for the sound of the grandfather clock counting moments she'd never get back. In her room, no longer their room, Charlotte let herself exhale. The door clicked shut behind her. She moved to the vanity, placed a hand on the carved mahogany. Her reflection stared back. The woman in the mirror wore luxury-like armor, but her eyes told another story. Not broken, but paused, held, waiting for a version of herself that could move again. She opened the drawer, searching for the envelope Douglas Wren had left. Instead, her fingers brushed something unfamiliar, an old leather-bound book, wedged behind the drawer track. She eased it out. Her breath caught. It was her father's journal. She hadn't seen it since the funeral. Sterling had insisted everything be boxed and professionally archived. But here it was, untouched. She opened it slowly. His handwriting still had that firm tilt, each letter deliberate. Legacy is not inheritance. It's what you protect with your soul. She closed the book, pressing it to her chest. Her father's words always knew when to return. A soft knock startled her. She turned, tucking the journal into a drawer just as Rosa entered. The older woman's eyes were kind, tired from years of service and silence. "Ma'am, your evening tea." "Thank you, Rosa." Rosa hesitated before speaking again. "You don't have to stay down there long tonight." Charlotte managed a smile. "I won't." The maid lingered a beat too long before quietly stepping back out. As Charlotte sipped her tea, her phone buzzed. Silent vibration against the marble top. A message. Unknown number. "He's not who you think he is. Ask about Ravenel." Her pulse skipped. She stared at the screen, rereading the words. Ravenel. It was a town about an hour west. Quiet, rural. Her family once owned land there. She hadn't thought about it in years. The message vanished. Charlotte rose, crossed the room, and pulled the French doors open. The warm night air spilled in. Below, Sterling was making a toast. Aubrey stood too close to him. Charlotte watched as he leaned down to say something to her, hand lightly resting at the small of her back. A calculated pause, and then He laughed, that same laugh he used at boardrooms and weddings, polished, hollow, empty of everything that had once been real between them. Charlotte closed the doors gently. She walked back to her desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the estate files Douglas had delivered last week. She hadn't dared open them. Sterling had dismissed them as old accounting. But now, Ravenel. Her fingers turned pages, property deeds, transfer notices, her father's name. The Carlyle Foundation listed as a secondary beneficiary. She paused. There it was, a signature that didn't match. Dated 2 months after her father's stroke, her heart thudded louder than the grandfather clock. Charlotte leaned back, the weight of the truth beginning to form. Something was buried in Ravenel, something her father never wanted in Sterling's hands. She placed the folder back inside, then retrieved the journal. Turning the pages slowly, she found an entry marked 6 months before his death. Sterling insists on folding Ravenel into the trust. I don't trust his intentions. He sees land as leverage. That place, it's more than acreage. It's what's left of what we were. Charlotte sat very still. A voice rose inside her. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. She had stayed quiet for long enough. The door opened again. Sterling stood there, flawless in his tailored tux. "You missed the toast." Charlotte met his eyes. "I heard it." He stepped closer, adjusting his cuff. "You'll need to make an appearance before dessert." "I'm tired." Smile through it. He studied her face. "People notice more than you think." "I'm sure they do." He looked at her for a long beat, then turned, leaving the door open behind him. She remained seated, staring down at the journal. A small gold necklace sat beside it, her mother's. She hadn't worn it in years. She fastened it gently around her neck, letting the weight of it settle against her collarbone. Downstairs, applause erupted. Charlotte closed the drawer. She stood. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was pretending. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The next morning, Charleston was wrapped in a slow, golden hush. Cicadas hummed beneath the gardenia bushes. Spanish moss swayed above the quiet drive. Inside the Carlyle estate, the silence was more than just morning stillness. It was a pause between appearances. Charlotte sat alone in the breakfast room, untouched tea cooling beside her. She'd barely slept. The letter, the forged signature, the journal. Her father's warning echoed in her chest like a clock she couldn't silence. Sterling had already left. His calendar was booked solid. Board meetings, investor calls, whatever else kept him moving fast enough to never stop long enough for truth to catch up. She opened her laptop and began drafting an email to Douglas Wren, her father's attorney. Subject: Ravenel Property. Urgent review. But she didn't hit send. Not yet. The thought of tipping her hand too soon made her fingers hesitate. She needed more. Something solid. Something Sterling couldn't explain away with a few well-placed words and an icy smile. A soft knock pulled her from the screen. "Come in," she called, smoothing her robe. Rosa stepped in, hands clasped in front of her apron. "Sorry to disturb, ma'am. The new property manager's arrived. Says you asked for a security overview." Charlotte blinked. "I didn't." Rosa offered a small shrug. "Said it was Mr. Carlyle's request. He's waiting out by the old garden house." Charlotte stood slowly, curious. "Thank you, Rosa. I'll meet him there." She changed quickly into linen slacks and a soft blouse, tied her hair back. The mirror caught her for a split second. Faint circles under her eyes, but clearer somehow. Sharper. A woman shifting into something she hadn't been in a long time. Aware. Outside, the garden house sat shaded beneath crepe myrtles in full bloom. And there he was, leaning against the railing, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the property like it held secrets. He looked up as she approached. "Mrs. Carlyle?" His voice was low, warm, not deferential, just calm. "That's what they still call me," Charlotte replied, offering her hand. "You're new." "Miles Denton," he said, shaking it gently. "Started this week." Sterling wanted a review of all the estate's logistics, deliveries, gates, lighting. He said privacy's been a concern. She studied him, early 40s maybe. A quiet confidence in his stance, not polished like Sterling, but grounded. "You have a background in security?" she asked. "Navy, then logistics consulting. Started managing private properties a few years ago, mostly legacy estates with high visibility." "So, you're here to manage appearances," she said, half smiling. He gave the smallest nod. "Sometimes the truth hides behind landscaping reports." Charlotte tilted her head. "Is that what Sterling told you?" "No, just what I've learned watching men like him." That paused her. Not the words, but the way he said them. Steady, not accusing, just knowing. She looked out over the hedges. "And what do men like him do? They collect things, property, people. They prefer control over connection." The breeze carried the scent of rosemary and sea salt. Charlotte folded her arms. "Did you know my father?" Miles glanced at her. "Victor Whitmore, no ma'am, but I know his kind. Quiet power. Lived by principle, not perception." She nodded slowly. "You speak like someone who's lost a few illusions." "I've earned every one of them," he replied, a quiet stretch between them. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Charlotte turned back to him. "I found something yesterday. Something my father left behind. It has me rethinking everything." Miles waited, didn't push. "There's land," she continued, "out in Ravenel. It was supposed to be in a trust. I think Sterling transferred it under his foundation, illegally." His brow furrowed slightly. "That's not small." "No," she agreed. "It's not. Do you trust your attorney?" "With my life," she said softly. "He's the only one who didn't vanish after the wedding." Miles closed the clipboard. "If you'd like, I can pull the public land records, quietly, cross-reference any filings under Carlyle Holdings." "You can do that?" He gave a small shrug. "My job is to protect this estate. If the estate's been compromised, I need to know how." Charlotte let that settle. For the first time in days, something shifted in her chest. A flicker of control. "I'll owe you one," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "Don't keep score with men like me, Charlotte. We tend to stay longer when no one's counting." She almost smiled, then caught herself. As she turned to head back toward the house, he added, "You might want to check the attic, by the way." She stopped. "There's a trunk up there with your father's initials. I saw it when I was checking structural issues." "You didn't open it?" "No, ma'am." "I figured if it was locked, it was meant to stay that way, until someone with a right reason came along." Her pulse quickened. She nodded once, then walked back slowly, the weight of his words following her like a second shadow. Back inside, Rosa met her near the staircase. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I think so," Charlotte whispered, "but I need to go upstairs." The attic hadn't been touched in over a year, not since Sterling hired a preservation team to box up anything he considered emotionally disruptive. She climbed the narrow steps, pausing at the final stair. The air smelled like cedar and dust. She found the trunk easily, tucked behind an old armoire. Her father's initials, VW, stamped on the brass plate. She traced them with her fingers, then turned the key that still hung from a ribbon tied to the handle. It clicked open. Inside, ledgers, blueprints, a rolled-up deed, letters. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her heart pounding. She pulled one envelope free, worn at the edges, faded ink. "To Charlotte, in case I'm not there when you need the truth." She stared at it, breath caught in her throat. The sunlight through the attic window caught dust in golden suspension. She opened the letter, and everything shifted. Charlotte's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. The paper crackled softly in the stillness of the attic, each line penned in her father's distinct, measured handwriting. Her eyes skimmed the first few lines, but then she slowed. The words weren't rushed, neither should she be. If you're reading this, something has already gone wrong. I left you everything I could, but I fear it won't be enough. Ravenel isn't just land. It's leverage. Protect it, Charlotte. Don't let the Carlises bury what was built with sweat and sacrifice. You'll know who to trust. You always did. She read it again and again. The final sentence refused to settle. You'll know who to trust. A sound behind her made her flinch. The attic steps creaked. Her heart leapt before she heard Rosa's voice float gently up. I brought you something. Charlotte exhaled, rising to her feet. Rosa appeared in the doorway with a tray of sweet tea and sliced apples. You've been up here a while. I found a letter from my father, Charlotte said, her voice thinner than she expected. Rosa's brows knit with quiet concern. Bad news? No, not exactly. Charlotte tucked the letter carefully back into the envelope. But it confirms something I already felt in my bones. Sterling moved Ravenel into his foundation without proper consent. It was never meant to be touched. Rosa set the tray down on a wooden crate. Then maybe it's time someone touches it again, properly. Charlotte studied the older woman. You've always known more than you let on, haven't you? Rosa smiled softly. This house listens, Charlotte. Always has. Some of us learn to listen back. She turned to leave, but paused at the stairwell. By the way, the new property manager, Miles, quiet man, but he notices things. Doesn't flinch easy. That matters. Charlotte gave a small nod, not trusting herself to speak. Later that afternoon, she found Miles on the back lawn, walking the perimeter near the guest cottage. He wore a weathered baseball cap and a light button-down, sleeves rolled to the forearm, clipboard in hand, but he didn't look rushed. He looked like someone who knew how to breathe, even when everyone else held theirs. You were right, Charlotte said as she approached. He turned, gave a small nod. I found the trunk, the letter, and more. She handed him a photocopy she'd made, her father's note and the most recent deed transfer she'd pulled from the estate files. I need to know if this was ever made public, or if it was buried. Miles scanned the pages. I'll cross-check the local register. There's a chance it's been digitized. She hesitated. Sterling's name isn't on the documents, only the foundation. He's careful like that. Miles folded the paper and tucked it into his folder. Careful is usually code for calculating. They stood in silence for a moment. The sound of wind brushing through the oaks made the world feel bigger than it had all day. Charlotte turned slightly toward him. Why did you really take this job? Miles tilted his head, considering. I needed the work, but also, I was looking for a place where quiet didn't mean peace. She blinked. What does it mean then? Sometimes quiet is just a pause before someone screams. Charlotte let that settle. Do you regret coming here? She asked. He looked at her. Really looked. No, not yet. There was something in the air then. A pause not caused by fear or calculation, but by two people carrying unspoken truths, acknowledging them in silence. Charlotte's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the screen. Douglas Wren. Calling. She answered immediately. Douglas? His voice was clipped but calm. I got your email. I pulled the land trust records like you asked. And? You're not going to like it. She stepped away from Miles, her back stiffening. Tell me. There was a rider added to the Whitmore Trust 6 months before your father passed. It stipulates that all land assets fall under joint review of the marital estate unless separately claimed. Meaning? She asked tightly. Meaning Sterling argued that you never contested the rider, which, in the court's eyes, implies consent. The land's technically his to leverage, unless you prove misrepresentation. Charlotte's chest felt tight. "I never saw that document," she whispered. "He said everything had been streamlined. I trusted him." "I know," Douglas said gently, "but we can file a request for audit. It might trigger a freeze on the trust assets. I'll draft it." "Do it," she said. "And Douglas." "Yes?" "If this gets ugly, I need to know I'm not alone in it." There was a pause. "Charlotte, your father chose me for a reason. I don't intend to disappoint either of you." She hung up and turned, her expression composed but pale. Miles didn't ask what the call was about. He simply watched her face shift through the storm. She sat down on the stone bench beneath the willow tree. He followed, sitting a few feet away. "I didn't want this," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I didn't marry Sterling for the estate or the money. I love the idea of being safe, of having someone to build a family with." "And now?" She looked down at her hands. "Now I feel like an asset he folded into his portfolio." Miles didn't reply. He just waited. Charlotte took a deep breath. "I found something else. A letter from my father to a woman named Althea Booker. It sounded urgent, protective. I don't know who she is yet. But I have a feeling she knows more about Ravenel than anyone. Want help finding her?" Charlotte looked at him. "Would you do that?" Miles's answer was simple. "Yes." A bird called out from a nearby cypress tree. The air had the softness of late summer, the kind that carries both heat and warning. She stood slowly. "I have to get ready for dinner. There's a board member joining us tonight." Miles stood with her. "You'll be okay?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. "Thank you." As she turned to go, he added quietly, "Charlotte." She looked back. "I don't know what Sterling's after, but whatever it is, don't let him convince you you're the problem." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Inside the house, she paused at the foot of the stairs, her reflection catching again in the hallway mirror. The necklace around her neck glinted, her mother's. Her hand moved to rest protectively over her stomach. Somewhere inside her, a shift had begun. And it wasn't going back. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The dining room shimmered in soft candlelight, a calculated illusion of warmth. The table was set for 6, though only 5 were expected. Sterling insisted on formality even when it wasn't needed, especially then. Charlotte stood at the edge of the room, adjusting the cuff of her silk blouse. The heirloom necklace, her mother's, sat cold against her collarbone. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, composed but strained. The butler entered. "Mrs. Carlyle, Mr. Elliot Kearns has arrived." "Thank you, Martin." She turned with a faint smile just as Sterling's voice carried from the hallway. "Elliot," he greeted, loud enough to echo. "Come in, you old shark." Laughter followed, practiced and clean. Charlotte stepped forward to greet the guest. Elliot Kearns was board vice chair of Carlyle Enterprises, older, silver-haired, with the smooth tone of a man who always kept one hand in someone's pocket. "Charlotte," he said warmly, kissing her cheek, "you look radiant." "Thank you, Elliot. I trust the drive-in wasn't too terrible." "Traffic was a mess, but I can't complain. This house makes it worth the trouble." Sterling ushered them toward the table, already pouring wine. "Let's eat before the salmon dries out. Chef did something French with it. I didn't listen." Charlotte moved to her seat, every step measured. Sterling was in performance mode, relaxed, gracious, attentive, the way he only was when the right people were watching. They ate, they laughed. Sterling talked shop, hinted at a new strategic move the board would hear about soon. Charlotte said little, smiled when needed. She was good at that now. Halfway through dessert, Elliot turned to her. "I saw the Carlyle Foundation listed as a top-level investor in the Low Country Redevelopment Initiative. Impressive work." Charlotte set her fork down carefully. "I wasn't aware we were involved." Sterling's expression didn't flinch. "It's recent. We're exploring land partnerships near Ravenel. Nothing confirmed yet." Her stomach twisted. Elliot sipped his wine. I heard there's pushback from the historical conservationists. They always push, Sterling said, waving it off. They'll come around once they see the numbers. Charlotte looked at him, the candlelight sharpening the edges of his jaw. So, we're moving into Ravenel now. His tone stayed light. It's just research. The Foundation's always exploring. But why Ravenel? Sterling met her gaze. A beat passed. Because it's underdeveloped. And valuable. Charlotte's throat tightened. Elliot, sensing the tension, cleared his throat. Well, I think it's smart. That corridor is the last untouched pocket near Charleston. Sterling raised his glass. To foresight. Charlotte didn't drink. She didn't move. She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. After Elliot left and the staff cleared the table, she remained seated. The chandelier cast delicate shadows on the walls. Sterling returned from the foyer, shrugging off his jacket. You were quiet tonight, he said, loosening his tie. Charlotte leaned back. You're moving on Ravenel without telling me. I didn't think you'd be interested. Her voice sharpened. My father's land is involved. Sterling stilled. Legally, it's not his anymore. That's your justification? He poured himself a drink. I don't need to justify it. It's business. And you're not on the board. Charlotte rose slowly, the chair legs brushing the rug. That land was never meant to be developed. He told me himself. He warned me. Sterling turned, sipping his bourbon. Victor had good intentions, but no vision. That land can do more in our hands than it ever did in his. Our hands? He smiled thinly. Charlotte, you've never cared about strategy. Don't start now just to win some moral argument. She stepped closer. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to understand how the man I married became someone who lies for profit. His smile faded. Don't rewrite history. You married into this life because it offered security. I gave you exactly that. You gave me a cage, she whispered. He set his glass down with a quiet clink. Be careful, Charlotte. The more emotional you get, the less seriously people will take you. She stared at him, something in her breaking, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. I'm not emotional. I'm awake. And she walked out. Upstairs, she moved quickly through her bedroom into the study. The letter from her father still sat on the desk. She touched the edge of the paper, grounding herself. Then she pulled out her phone. She didn't call Douglas. Not yet. Instead, she called the number that had texted her days ago, the one that mentioned Ravenel. It rang twice. Then, hello? A woman's voice. Older, guarded. Charlotte hesitated. Is this Althea Booker? Silence. Who's asking? My name is Charlotte Carlyle. I believe my father, Victor Whitmore, wrote to you before he passed. Another pause. He did. I need to speak with you in person. I don't get involved in Carlyle business. This isn't about the company. It's about the truth. The line was quiet for a long time. Then Althea said, Meet me in Ravenel. Tomorrow, noon. Don't bring anyone. The call ended. Charlotte stood there, the dial tone still ringing in her ear. Down the hallway, her bedroom door remained open, the light spilling across the hardwood like a silent invitation. She closed it, then locked it. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the clock tick, 1 second after another, like footsteps in a hallway that led to a door she had never dared open. But tomorrow she would, and everything would change. Ravenel felt like a different world. The highway narrowed to a 2-lane road flanked by wild marshland and ancient cypress trees. Charlotte drove with the windows down, the scent of salt and pine seeping into the leather of the car. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Her stomach fluttered, not from the pregnancy this time, but anticipation, nerves, a kind of fear that came not from danger, but from finally facing what had long been hidden. The GPS signal dropped 5 miles out. She didn't need it. She remembered the old church. Her father used to bring her here as a child. Picnics under oak trees, stories about the land and the people who had built lives on it long before her family ever owned a single acre. When she pulled off the road, the tires crunched over gravel and dust. The church stood in the clearing like a memory made solid, small, weathered, whitewashed, its steeple leaning slightly from time. Althea Booker stood on the front steps, arms crossed. She wore a linen dress the color of bone and shoes that had seen decades of Carolina summers. Her gray hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. Her gaze didn't soften as Charlotte stepped out of the car. "You came alone," she said flatly. "You asked me to." Althea nodded once and turned, pushing open the creaking wooden door. "Come inside. It's hot enough to blister truth right off the tongue." The interior was cooler, shaded by stained glass and time. Dust hung like lace in the light. No pews, just folding chairs and a battered piano pushed against the wall. Charlotte took a seat. So did Althea, across from her. No table between them, just silence. "My father mentioned you in his letters," Charlotte said softly. "He trusted you." Althea's face twitched, something between sadness and defiance. "Your father was one of the last men in this state who still knew what a promise meant." "I think he knew something was coming," Charlotte continued. "Something with the land. He said it had to be protected." Althea leaned back. "That land is more than just soil. It holds stories, blood, people Sterling Carlyle doesn't even see when he steps on it." Charlotte's voice caught. "What do you mean?" Althea tilted her head. "Your grandfather, Victor's father, bought that land from a family who had lived there since emancipation. Bought is generous. He offered just enough to look legal, forced the rest. And when Victor inherited it, he wanted to make things right. He set aside the back half of the property, quietly deeded it to my family. My father never took it to court. He didn't believe in papers. He believed in trust." Charlotte's chest tightened. "But there's no record of that." "There was. Until Sterling moved everything into that foundation, they buried the original deeds, claimed the land was underutilized, called it a strategic realignment." "Why didn't you come forward?" Althea looked at her like she'd never been asked something so naive. "Because people like me don't get heard, Charlotte. We get erased." The words landed hard. Charlotte blinked back the sting behind her eyes. "I want to make it right, but I don't know how yet." "You start by seeing what your father saw," Althea said. "This land, your family's name, it was never meant to be currency. It was meant to be responsibility." Silence filled the church again. Outside, cicadas had begun to sing. Althea rose, walked to the piano, and pulled open a drawer beneath the keyboard. She returned with a folded map. Worn, torn, edges curling. She laid it across Charlotte's lap. "Your father made this. It's a record of the original boundary lines. Mine, yours, where the graves are. Where the old spring sits. Sterling doesn't know this exists. He never looked deep enough." Charlotte studied the map. Her father's handwriting, notations, even a sketch of the old oak tree she used to play beneath. She ran her fingers over it like she was reading Braille. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Althea's voice softened for the first time. "Say you won't be another one who stays quiet." Charlotte nodded slowly. "I won't." They sat in stillness, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Finally, Althea said, "When the time comes, I'll testify. I'll tell the court what I know. But it has to be done right, and fast." Charlotte stood, folding the map carefully, reverently. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, Althea called after her, "Charlotte." She stopped at the doorway. "You look just like your mother, but you carry your father's fire." Charlotte swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded once before stepping back into the sunlight. The drive home felt different, the air thicker, the trees taller. Back at the estate, Miles was waiting in the gravel courtyard near the garage. He stepped forward the second she got out of the car. "You're back later than I expected," he said. I found her, Althea Booker. He raised his brows. And? She's everything I hoped, and more than I was ready for. They walked together toward the house, her steps slow, deliberate. She gave me a map. Proof. Sterling doesn't know about it. Miles nodded. That's your opening. I'm not ready to go to court, she said. Not yet, but I want to force his hand. Make him reveal his own intentions. They reached the steps of the veranda. You sure you're ready for that kind of bluff? He asked quietly. She looked at him, really looked. I'm done playing gentle. He didn't smile, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe even admiration. You've changed, he said. No, Charlotte replied. I've just stopped hiding. And with the map pressed to her chest, she stepped inside, into the house that would never feel like home again. But it was no longer a prison, it was a battleground. And she had finally chosen a side. The next morning the estate was unusually quiet. Even the wind seemed to move more carefully, as if the grounds themselves could sense something was about to shift. Charlotte stood in the center of her father's old study, sunlight streaming through the plantation shutters. The map Althea had given her was spread across the desk, anchored at the corners by a silver paperweight, a photo of her parents and her unopened planner. She traced the lines again, the handwritten notes. The ink faded in places, but never the intent. It was more than land. It was history, inheritance, responsibility. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miles? He stepped inside, holding a folder in one hand and 2 coffees in the other. You're up early? I didn't sleep much. He handed her the coffee without needing to ask how she liked it. Dark, no sugar. She took it, grateful. I cross-referenced everything, he said, opening the folder. The land trust transfer wasn't just shady, it was rushed. There are 2 notaries on file who've since lost their licenses for document fraud. Charlotte blinked. That means, if we can prove the signatures were obtained under false pretenses, the trust transfer collapses. The land reverts. She let out a long breath. That would bring everything down. It would. She turned to face him fully. I want to move. I want Sterling to know I'm not afraid to expose him. But not directly. Not yet. Miles nodded. So what's the plan? I want to leak the audit request. His brow rose slightly. To the press? To Dana. Miles's mouth pulled into a slow smile. The socialite, with a memory like a safe, and a mouth like a megaphone? Charlotte nodded. She's connected to every board wife in the Tri-County area. One whisper from her, and this thing will move like wildfire through every charity event, garden club, and donor dinner. Miles leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. And Sterling won't know where it started. Exactly. There was a quiet beat between them. You sure you're ready for the fallout? He asked. Charlotte sipped her coffee, then met his gaze. I'm more afraid of staying silent. That afternoon, Dana Whitfield arrived in a flurry of perfume, oversized sunglasses, and a Chanel tote that probably cost more than a used car. She swept into the sitting room, air-kissing Charlotte like they hadn't spoken in months. I've missed you, darling, but your invite had just the right tone of intrigue. Charlotte smiled politely. Thank you for coming. They sat. Dana crossed her legs, already scanning the room like it might yield secrets if she looked long enough. I wanted to talk to you about Sterling, Charlotte began. Dana's eyebrow lifted. Scandal? Divorce? Secret twins? Charlotte offered a tired smile. Closer to embezzlement. The room shifted. Dana leaned forward slightly. You're not joking. Charlotte handed her a thin packet. Copies of the trust transfer, a highlighted line in the audit request, and a notarized affidavit from one of the disgraced signers. Dana read it with increasing stillness. Why are you showing me this? Because I know how this town works. The courts move slow, but whispers move fast. Dana's eyes narrowed. And you want this whispered? I want it understood. Not publicly, not yet, just placed in the right ears. Quietly, so he knows. Dana exhaled, long and low. Do you know what you're starting? Charlotte nodded. I'm starting the truth. There was a pause. Dana stood, smoothing her skirt. You've changed. Maybe I finally arrived, Charlotte said. Dana turned, already planning the order of names and lunches in her head. Consider it done. And, Charlotte? Yes? I always liked you better than him anyway. By evening, the tremors had already started. Charlotte sat alone on the back porch, the sun dipping low beyond the oaks, a breeze tugging at her robe. Her phone buzzed beside her. Unknown number. She hesitated. Answered. Charlotte Carlyle. A pause. Then a familiar voice. Low, clipped, too calm. Do you think you're clever? Sterling asked. I think I'm awake. You're playing a dangerous game. No, she said softly. You played it. I just finally read the rules. Another pause. You've embarrassed me, he said, his voice still calm, but the kind of calm that trembles beneath the surface. Do you know what that means? I know what it meant for my father when you took what was his. I know what it meant for the Bookers. I know what it means to watch someone pretend legacy is a trophy. You won't win. I don't need to, she whispered. I just need the truth to breathe. Click. The call ended. Charlotte closed her eyes, heart pounding, but steady. She turned her head slightly and saw Miles standing at the edge of the porch, arms folded, watching the sky. How much did you hear? She asked. Enough. He didn't move closer. Didn't need to. You sure about this path? He asked again. I'm not sure about anything, she admitted, except that it's mine to walk now. Miles nodded, then sat beside her. They watched the sun dip below the trees in silence. In the distance, thunder rolled softly, but Charlotte didn't flinch. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace, not because the storm was over, but because she had chosen not to run from it. Rain tapped lightly against the windows of the sunroom, a steady rhythm that soothed and unnerved all at once. Charlotte sat in the wicker chair her mother once loved, watching droplets trace down the glass like quiet confessions. Across from her, the newspaper lay open on the coffee table. Page 6. A column titled Rumors Surrounding Ravenel Redevelopment, with a byline that read Anonymous Contributor. It had begun. Sterling hadn't spoken to her since the call. He hadn't come home the night before either. She didn't ask where he was. She didn't care. Rosa entered, drying her hands on a linen towel. You've got another visitor. Charlotte looked up, surprised. Who? Rosa gave a small shrug. Didn't give a name, said you'd know him. Before Charlotte could respond, the door creaked open. Miles stepped in, rain glistening on his jacket. She stood, trying not to show how much she was relieved to see him. You're soaked. He grinned faintly. Storm caught me on the way back from the courthouse. Her heart jumped. You went to the clerk's office? He nodded, pulling a folder from under his coat. I found something. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Tell me everything. Miles dropped into the seat, water still clinging to the cuffs of his sleeves. He opened the folder and laid the contents out carefully. 3 years ago, Sterling filed a quiet claim on a parcel adjacent to Ravenel. Land your father sold decades ago. It was part of a conservation buffer, not valuable by itself. But if it's attached to the trust land, Charlotte murmured, it creates a contiguous property, enough to justify rezoning. Exactly, he said. And here's the kicker. He filed it through a shell company, one that traces back to a woman named Aubrey Monroe. Charlotte blinked. I've never heard that name. She's listed on 2 LLC filings as the managing agent. And Miles hesitated. There's a property lease in her name, downtown Charleston. Sterling's name is on the utilities. The implication hit like thunder. He's been hiding her, Charlotte said slowly. Financing her. She's not just a business pawn. She's more, Miles confirmed. Charlotte sat back, the ceiling fan spinning above her like time she couldn't get back. I need to meet her, she said. Miles gave her a long, searching look. Are you sure that's a good idea? I'm not here to throw accusations. I need to know how deep this goes, and I need to know who I'm really up against. He nodded once. Then let me make the call. Charlotte exhaled. Thank you. She didn't say how much it meant. She didn't need to. That evening, as dusk fell and the air turned heavy again with rain, Charlotte stood in front of the fireplace in the drawing room, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She heard the door before she heard Rosa's voice. She's here. Charlotte turned slowly. The woman who entered looked nothing like what she'd imagined. Aubrey Monroe was young, no older than 30, maybe, polished, beautiful in a curated way, with a sleek trench coat and a cautious smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you for seeing me, she said softly. Charlotte nodded, gesturing to the armchair by the fire. Please, sit. They both took their seats, the fire crackling softly between them. A beat of silence passed. I'm not here to judge you, Charlotte said gently. I'm here to understand. Aubrey looked down at her hands. I didn't plan any of this. Most people don't, Charlotte said. He told me he was separated, Aubrey said quickly, the words tumbling out. That your marriage was only legal on paper, that he hadn't lived here in months. Charlotte remained quiet. I believed him. I was working at a non-profit gala when we met. He said he admired my work, said he wanted to invest in a cause, not just a company. Charlotte's voice was low. And then? Aubrey looked away. Then I started seeing money appear, rent, my car, a startup I didn't even ask for. He said it was because he believed in me, that he wanted me to be independent. But the more he gave, the more he owned. Charlotte nodded slowly. That's what he does. Aubrey's eyes lifted to hers. I didn't know about Ravenel or your father. Not until last month when a lawyer friend flagged my name on a zoning notice. I saw the land filings. I confronted Sterling. He told me to stop asking questions. Charlotte leaned forward slightly. Why didn't you leave? Aubrey's voice broke. Because I was afraid. Not of what he'd do. Of what I'd already let him turn me into. The fire popped softly. The room felt smaller somehow. I'm pregnant, Aubrey said suddenly. Charlotte's breath caught. Aubrey looked ashamed. He doesn't know yet. I wasn't going to tell him. But I thought you should know. Charlotte stared into the flames. For a moment, everything inside her twisted. Rage, sorrow, betrayal. But what surprised her most was the absence of jealousy. I'm not angry with you, she said quietly. I'm angry that I let myself believe he could protect what mattered most. I want out, Aubrey whispered. I'll testify. I'll give you whatever records you need. Charlotte looked at her, eyes clear. Then we protect each other. Aubrey nodded. They sat in silence, two women who had unknowingly shared the same shadow. When Aubrey left, Charlotte didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She went upstairs, opened her father's old journal, and wrote down a single line beneath his final entry. It ends with me. Downstairs, the fire burned on, quiet, steady, unshaken, just like her. The house felt colder that morning, though the thermostat read the same. Charlotte wrapped herself in a knit shawl and sat alone in the conservatory, staring at the garden beyond the glass. The camellias were just beginning to bloom, bright, stubborn bursts of pink in a grey season. She cradled her teacup in both hands but didn't drink. Her eyes were locked on the stone path winding between the hedges, the one her father used to walk when he needed clarity. She needed it now. Behind her, Rosa's footsteps were soft. Mrs. Carlyle, Miles called. He said the documents from Aubrey just came through. He'll be here in an hour. Charlotte nodded. Thank you. Rosa hesitated. You didn't sleep again. "No," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I could make that lemon balm tea your mother used to drink," Rosa offered gently. Charlotte smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Not yet. I need a clear head today." Rosa stepped back, understanding. When she was alone again, Charlotte reached into the pocket of her shawl and pulled out her father's journal. She opened to the page she'd written on the night before. "It ends with me." She ran her finger beneath the words like underlining a promise. Then she turned the page. Her father's last entry was dated just a week before his death. His handwriting had grown thinner by then, but his voice still lived in every stroke. "Sterling is a man who knows how to hold power, but not how to carry it. I've tried to guide him, but he doesn't listen. Charlotte will have to decide what matters most, preserving a name or protecting a legacy. I pray she chooses wisely." She closed the journal and exhaled. That choice had already been made. By late morning, Miles arrived, the raincoat slung over his arm, his expression tight with urgency. "They're legit," he said, laying the documents out on the kitchen island. "Emails, bank transfers, scanned contracts, all signed by Sterling, most through third parties linked to shell companies. And Aubrey's name is tied to more than just property. There's a wire trail connecting her business account to Carlyle Foundation funds." Charlotte's breath caught. He laundered money through the nonprofit? Not quite laundering, more like misappropriation, but it's enough to open a criminal investigation. She stared at the paper, her hand trembling just slightly. "He used my father's foundation to fund his affair." "And his empire," Miles added grimly. "But there's more." She looked up. "One of the invoices Aubrey gave me. It wasn't for Ravenel land development. It was for a private lobbying firm. They were hired to suppress zoning reports months before your father passed." Charlotte blinked. "You think he was planning this before the will was even read?" Miles hesitated. "I think Sterling knew Victor wasn't going to give him what he wanted, and he wasn't going to wait." She turned away, the kitchen suddenly too small, too close. She pressed her palm to the window pane, watching the wind bend the trees. "All this time," she murmured, "he played the grieving son-in-law while dismantling everything my father stood for." Miles's voice was quiet behind her. "This is more than betrayal. This is a case." Charlotte nodded slowly. "Then it's time we bring it forward." That evening, the estate was set to host a donor event, a legacy dinner for the Carlyle Foundation. The irony was thick enough to taste. Sterling returned just before 6, looking untouched by the storm he surely knew was coming. He greeted staff, adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror, kissed her cheek like nothing had shifted. Charlotte didn't flinch. They stood together at the top of the grand staircase as guests arrived below, wine glasses clinking, laughter echoing. "Smile," Sterling murmured, lips barely moving. "Tonight's important." She turned to him, face calm, voice smooth. "It is." He leaned closer, confident. "You're playing your part well." She looked into his eyes. "I'm not playing anymore." And with that, she descended the stairs, leaving him standing alone at the top. The ballroom gleamed with golden light and soft music. Charlotte moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting guests, fielding questions. But her mind wasn't on the gala. It was on the USB drive in her clutch. By the end of the evening, that drive would be in the hands of Douglas Hayes, the Foundation's legal counsel, and a man who once promised her father he'd never let the mission be corrupted. Halfway through the night, Dana appeared at her side. "You look unshakable," Dana said, sipping champagne. Charlotte gave a small smile. "Good, I don't feel that way." Dana's expression sobered. "You should know. Sterling's mother is here." Charlotte blinked. "Patricia? Why?" She said she had to see something for herself. Before Charlotte could respond, the older woman appeared through the crowd like a specter, elegant, cold, poised. "Charlotte," Patricia said, voice as polished as ever. "Patricia, I didn't know you were coming." Patricia studied her with eyes that had once cut deeper than any words. "I had a feeling this night would matter." Charlotte lifted her chin. "It does." Patricia leaned in, just slightly. "He's not invincible, and you, finally, look like someone who knows that." Then she turned and disappeared back into the crowd. Charlotte stood still for a long moment. Then, quietly, she pulled the USB from her clutch and slipped it into Douglas's coat pocket as he passed by with a drink in hand. Their eyes met. He gave a small nod. It had begun. And by the time the music faded and the lights dimmed, Sterling still hadn't realized that the ground beneath his empire was already shifting. Charlotte returned upstairs alone. She undressed in silence, standing before the mirror in her slip, one hand resting over the curve of her stomach. "You won't inherit his silence," she whispered to her unborn child, and she turned off the light. The morning after the gala dawned with a strange stillness. The estate, usually humming with quiet movement by sunrise, felt suspended. Charlotte woke early, not because of nerves, but because sleep no longer brought peace. She sat by the bedroom window, her robe drawn tight, fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea she hadn't sipped. The USB was gone. The files were in Douglas Hayes's hands now. The truth had begun to move, silent but sure. She could feel it. By mid-morning, she was in the study, reviewing the last stack of documents Miles had printed. Land filings, board communications, and one new discovery. A letter from the Carlyle Foundation's former treasurer, unsent, found in a sealed archive box. It was dated 6 months before her father's death. "Victor, I can't keep pretending we don't see what's happening. Sterling is manipulating the assets, slowly, quietly. I know you want to believe in redemption, but this isn't caution. This is conquest." Charlotte read the line 3 times before folding the letter, her fingers shaking slightly. She didn't know what was worse, the content or the fact that her father never confronted it. She heard footsteps in the hallway before the knock. "Miles?" she called, but it wasn't him. Sterling opened the door without waiting for a reply, his face carefully neutral. His tie was still knotted, his shirt crisp. But something in his posture had changed, too controlled. "May I?" he asked, as if they were strangers playing polite. Charlotte nodded once. "You're already inside." He stepped in, letting the door close behind him. His eyes swept the room, the desk, the stacks of paper. "I've been hearing things," he said quietly. She stood, her voice calm. "Then you've been listening to the wrong people for once." His eyes narrowed. "You always did like to think you were above the noise." "No," she said. "I was just taught to look for the signal." He paused, then walked to the bookshelf, running a finger along the spines. "I saw Douglas leave last night. Odd time for him to be mingling." Charlotte didn't answer. Sterling turned to face her. "Is this how you plan to end us? A whisper campaign? Backdoor deals and midnight emails?" "I didn't end us," she said softly. "You did, the moment you turned this legacy into a transaction." His mouth curled. "You've always been dramatic. And you've always been careful to keep your hands clean," she said, her voice sharpening. "But you forgot. Paper trails don't lie. And neither do people who have nothing left to protect." His eyes flicked briefly, just for a second, then steadied. "You think you can burn me down and walk away untouched?" "I'm not untouched," she said, stepping closer. "I'm burned, Sterling. I'm just not afraid of the heat anymore." He stared at her, something unreadable passing through his eyes. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach anything inside him. "You've changed." "No," she said. "I've woken up." He turned, hand on the doorknob. "Be careful, Charlotte. You're building something that won't survive a storm." She met his gaze, then let it fall. He left without another word. An hour later, Miles arrived. "I saw Sterling's car leaving," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "How bad?" Charlotte exhaled. He knows, not the full extent, but enough. Miles set his bag on the desk. Then it's time to move. She nodded. I want to call the board. An emergency session. Not to accuse, but to ask for transparency. We lay out what we have. Let the questions begin on their terms. Miles's eyes met hers. That's a risk. If even one of them leaks it, Sterling will strike first. Then I need to speak before he does. They spent the next hour preparing. Files, exhibits. The map from Althea. The email chain connecting the shell company. Even Aubrey's signed affidavit, placed in a sealed envelope, just in case. Charlotte called Douglas, then Dana. By late afternoon, 6 of the 10 board members had confirmed they'd attend. The rest were promised video call-ins. At 5 o'clock, the library was filled with men and women who once toasted Sterling as a visionary. Now, they sat in silence as Charlotte stood behind the lectern her father once used. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I wish I could say this was just a matter of foundation business, but it's more than that. It's personal. And it's necessary." She paused. No papers, no teleprompter, just truth. "For months, I've been reviewing the Foundation's financial and land records. With the help of a legal advisor and independent counsel, we've discovered inconsistencies, property transfers, lobbying contracts, shell companies financed through foundation funds without full board review." Whispers began. A few brows furrowed, but no interruptions. "I have documentation. I have testimonies. But more than that, I have a responsibility. To my father, to this community, to the legacy this foundation was meant to protect." Douglas leaned forward slightly. So did Dana. "I'm not accusing. I'm inviting transparency. Tonight, I ask that we appoint an independent auditor and suspend all major land transactions until the review is complete." There was a long silence. Then a woman named Elise Tarrant, a former judge and longtime board member, spoke first. "I knew Victor for 40 years. He trusted Sterling, but he trusted you more. And if you say it's time to look deeper, then we owe it to him and to ourselves." Others murmured agreement. Charlotte felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but something close to relief. It was beginning to work. She stepped down from the lectern, her legs trembling only slightly, her fingers cold. Miles met her at the edge of the room, pressing a warm hand to the small of her back. Not possessive, just steady. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said, breath catching. "We're just starting." As the board filed out, voices buzzing, documents exchanged, Charlotte felt the shift in the air, not just around her, but within her. She wasn't hiding anymore. And Sterling, wherever he was, had just lost his silence. The storm had found him now. The day after the board meeting, the air in the estate felt thinner, lighter, as if, after months of emotional suffocation, something had finally shifted loose in the foundation of Charlotte's world. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, watching the kettle come to a boil, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach. The baby had started to flutter more often, gentle, ghost-like movements that always arrived when the world got quiet. She didn't know if it was comfort or coincidence, but it gave her something to hold on to. Behind her, Rosa moved about quietly, wiping down the counters, refilling the fruit bowl. When Charlotte turned around, Rosa was watching her, gently, with a knowing look that said more than words ever could. "You did something brave," Rosa said finally. Charlotte smiled faintly. "I'm not sure it was brave. Just overdue. It takes strength to do what's overdue, especially when it costs you peace." Charlotte's eyes dropped. "Sterling hasn't called." "Good," Rosa replied. "Silence, sometimes, is confession." Charlotte nodded, though her thoughts churned. It wasn't over, far from it. And deep down, she knew the silence wasn't peace. It was the quiet breath before the storm. By noon, Miles arrived. He looked like he hadn't slept much either, but there was something electric in his eyes. "They're rattled," he said, tossing his satchel on the dining table. "3 board members called Douglas this morning. They're demanding a hold on all foundation contracts until the audit clears." Charlotte sank into a chair. "So it's happening." "It's happening," he confirmed. "And there's more." Aubrey sent over a signed statement detailing her interactions with Sterling, dates, transfers, conversations. It's airtight. Charlotte felt her throat tighten. "And she's willing to go public?" She said, and I quote, "If Charlotte walks into the fire, I'm not letting her do it alone." Charlotte closed her eyes. "She doesn't know how much that means." "She will," Miles said. They sat in silence for a beat. "You should know," Miles added. "There's been a leak." Charlotte's eyes snapped open. "From who?" "Not the board, not Dana. Someone close to Sterling, I think. The Post-Courier is running a piece tomorrow. Anonymous sources. The headline reads, 'Charleston Air Under Scrutiny, Non-Profit Tied to Land Disputes.'" Charlotte exhaled. "It's starting." "Yeah, but you're ready." She hesitated, then looked at him. "Miles, if you hadn't come back." He met her eyes, voice quiet. "You would have done this anyway." "I just walked beside you." There was something in the way he said it, something still unspoken. Charlotte didn't answer. Instead, she stood, moved to the sideboard, and pulled open a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside was an envelope, her father's last will and testament, the original copy, handwritten and notarized before the version Sterling had presented to the board. She'd found it tucked inside a hollowed-out law book the night after the funeral. She never showed it to anyone. She'd been afraid, or maybe not ready. Until now. She handed it to Miles. He unfolded the pages slowly, reading, his brows pulled together as he skimmed each line. Then his gaze snapped to hers. "This changes everything." Charlotte nodded. "It states that I'm the sole decision-maker over Foundation land." Sterling wasn't just overstepping. He was violating an explicit clause. "Why didn't you show this sooner?" "I needed to be sure," she said quietly. "That I wasn't acting out of grief, or anger, or fear. That I was acting from truth." Miles folded the document, eyes never leaving hers. "Then let's bring the truth to the table." By the time afternoon settled in, Charlotte had arranged a private meeting with the Foundation's legal counsel and Douglas. No board members, no staff, just the facts. It was scheduled for the next morning. But that night, something unexpected happened. As Charlotte sat on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl and listening to the wind in the trees, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then, "Charlotte." Sterling's voice was quieter than she remembered, slower. Not measured like before, worn. She stiffened. "What do you want?" "I read the article draft," he said. "I have friends at the paper. It's going to destroy me." Charlotte didn't respond. "I didn't call to beg," he added quickly. I wanted to understand. Why now? Why you?" She closed her eyes, pain rising in her chest, not from the past, but from everything she'd swallowed to survive it. "Because I was raised by a man who taught me that silence in the face of harm is complicity," she said. "Because I watched you take something sacred and use it like currency, and because I couldn't look at my child one day and say I knew, and did nothing." There was a long silence on the line, then something she hadn't expected. "I loved you once," he said. "In the beginning." Charlotte's hand trembled. "I believe you," she whispered. "But love without respect is just control in disguise." He exhaled, a sound like resignation. "You're not the woman I married." "No," she said. "I'm the woman I should have been all along." The line went dead. Charlotte sat there for a long time, the phone in her lap, the wind brushing against her cheeks. Inside, the house was still. And when she stood to leave the porch, she paused, just briefly, and looked out across the garden, where the camellias bloomed defiantly in the night. Tomorrow, everything would change, but tonight, she allowed herself to breathe. The morning light filtered through the old lace curtains, painting gentle shadows on the oak floorboards of Charlotte's study. She'd barely slept. The final meeting with the Foundation's legal team was just hours away. Everything, Sterling's manipulations, the false contracts, the rewritten will, was leading to this. The truth would land, loud or quiet. It would shake something loose. She stood at the window, arms crossed over her growing belly. The baby kicked once, firm, sure. "I know," she whispered. "We're almost through." Downstairs, Rosa called her name softly. "Ms. Charlotte, Miles is here." Charlotte smoothed the edge of her blouse and took a breath before descending the stairs. Miles stood by the entryway, holding 2 coffees, one black, one with oat milk, just the way she liked. "You good?" he asked, his tone soft but alert. "As good as someone walking into a fire can be," she replied. Miles gave her a look. "You're not walking into fire. You are the fire." That made her smile, if just for a moment. As they settled into the car and drove into downtown Charleston, a storm began gathering overhead. Thick clouds, a hush in the air, like the city itself was holding its breath. Miles tapped the steering wheel absently as they passed familiar streets, but Charlotte's mind was elsewhere. "What happens after?" she finally asked, staring out the window. Miles didn't look at her. "You reclaim what's yours. You rebuild." "And Sterling?" Miles sighed. "He'll spin it, or sulk, or shatter, maybe all 3. But this isn't about him anymore." Charlotte nodded, but something inside her twisted anyway. Endings always hurt, even necessary ones. The meeting was held in a modest law office 2 blocks from the courthouse. No boardroom theatrics, just 4 people seated at a square table. Charlotte, Miles, Douglas Hayes, and Elaine Preston, the Foundation's senior legal advisor. Charlotte laid out the original will, the signed statement from Aubrey, and the supporting documentation on land misuse and funds diversion. Her voice didn't shake once. Elaine examined the documents in silence, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. "This is significant," she finally said. "Legally, this puts you in primary control of the Foundation's land assets, and Sterling could face civil repercussions, possibly criminal, depending on what the audit turns up." "I don't want revenge," Charlotte said. "I want accountability." Douglas nodded. "We'll proceed carefully. The Foundation's name must be protected, but not at the cost of the truth." The weight of it settled in Charlotte's chest. Not pressure exactly, but something closer to release. She'd done it. But her moment of peace was short-lived. As they left the office, her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to. "Charlotte Carlyle?" came a woman's voice, slightly winded. Nervous. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Marla Wilkes. I'm the floor supervisor at Charleston General. I didn't know who else to call. Sterling Carlyle was brought in 20 minutes ago. Possible panic episode. He was asking for you." Charlotte stopped cold on the sidewalk, her hand tightening around the phone. "He's in the ER?" she asked, the words coming slower than she expected. "Yes, ma'am. He's stable but disoriented. Kept saying your name." Charlotte glanced at Miles, who had already stopped walking. He didn't ask, he just waited. "I'm on my way," she said. 10 minutes later, she stepped into the fluorescent-lit hallway of Charleston General's emergency department, her heels echoing on tile, her heart hammering. The receptionist waved her through quietly. Sterling lay on a narrow hospital bed, an IV in his arm, his shirt undone at the collar. He looked pale, hollow, like something in him had cracked. When he saw her, he didn't speak, just blinked, slow and heavy. "What happened?" Charlotte asked, her voice steady, if distant. Sterling's voice was hoarse. "They said I collapsed in the parking garage. Couldn't breathe." She said nothing, letting the silence stretch. "I saw the article," he added. "I saw everything." Charlotte folded her arms. "You called me here to say what, Sterling? That you regret it? That you're sorry?" He looked away. "No, I realized I built everything to impress ghosts. Your father, my own, the world. And I never looked at what it was costing you." Charlotte swallowed hard. She hadn't expected this. Not humility, not awareness. "You took everything sacred and turned it into leverage," she said quietly. "You made me feel small in my own name." "I know," he whispered. "And it's killing me." Charlotte stepped closer, not out of affection, but clarity. "I don't hate you," she said. "I'm past that, but I won't save you from consequences." Sterling nodded faintly. "I never really thought you'd leave," he said, eyes glassy. "I didn't leave," she said. "I stayed too long." And with that, she turned and walked out. The wind had picked up outside. The storm was closer now, thick clouds rolling over the rooftops. Miles stood by the car, watching her. "You okay?" he asked. Charlotte nodded slowly. "Yes. For the first time. Yes." She placed a hand on her belly, felt the baby turn again. A life still growing. A legacy still unfolding. And for once, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a door. The morning sun poured into the conservatory, casting gold across the floor tiles and bathing Charlotte in soft light as she stood among her mother's old camellias. The blossoms were delicate, almost trembling in the breeze. She pressed a hand gently to her belly and breathed in deep. Everything was moving forward. The audit had begun. Aubrey had filed her statement. Sterling hadn't contacted her again since the hospital. No threats, no apologies, just silence. And the silence this time was not empty. It was freedom. Charlotte walked back inside, barefoot, trailing her fingers along the polished banister of the grand staircase. The house didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like hers again. In the kitchen, Rosa was pouring tea and humming an old hymn under her breath. She glanced up as Charlotte entered, her expression instantly shifting. "You slept?" Rosa asked, surprised. "Enough," Charlotte smiled. "More than I have in months." Rosa tilted her head. "It's in your face. You look like yourself again." Charlotte sat, touched by the simple truth in the compliment. "It feels like I'm slowly returning to the girl my father raised." Rosa placed a warm hand over hers. "No, baby. You've become the woman he prayed you'd become." The words settled over her heart like a blessing. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Once, then again, urgent. She looked at Rosa, who gave a small nod. Charlotte moved to the door, heart ticking just a little faster. Miles stood on the porch, his tie slightly loosened, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were urgent. "You need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. She stepped aside, and he came in, pulling up an email. "It's from someone inside the foundation," he said. "Anonymous, but the content checks out." He handed the phone to her. Charlotte's eyes scanned the screen. It was a PDF scan of a letter on Foundation letterhead, dated 6 weeks ago, addressed to a real estate attorney in Atlanta. It authorized the private sale of one of the Foundation's most historic properties, without board review. Sterling's name was signed at the bottom. "Why Atlanta?" she asked quietly. "That's where the shell company's registered," Miles said. "It's not just about Charleston anymore. He was expanding this operation fast." Charlotte's mouth went dry. "And this document, it's real?" Miles nodded. "Authenticated, the signature matches, and the recipient confirmed receipt, off the record." Charlotte gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "So the board doesn't know this?" "Not yet," he said, "but they will. I've already flagged it to Elaine. This could push the legal team to file formal charges." Rosa, listening silently in the doorway, finally spoke. He was betting on no one looking deep enough, that you'd stay quiet. Charlotte met her eyes. He's about to find out I won't. She looked at Miles again. We bring this to the board tonight. No more delays. He hesitated. There's one more thing. Charlotte's chest tightened. What? Miles reached into his bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I wasn't sure when to give you this. She opened it slowly and froze. Inside was a gold pendant, an old, delicate piece she hadn't seen in over a decade. Her mother's. I found it in one of your father's files, Miles said softly, wrapped in a note. He left it for you, but Sterling never passed it on. Charlotte stared at the locket, her breath catching. She opened it. Inside, on one side, was a photo of her parents, young, laughing. On the other, a folded scrap of paper, yellowed with time. She unfolded it with shaking fingers. When you forget your strength, wear this. And remember, you were never meant to be small. Dad. Charlotte blinked hard, the tears stinging her eyes. He kept this from me, she whispered. And now, Miles said gently, you wear it on your terms. She fastened it around her neck slowly, reverently. The gold rested against her skin like a promise. Later that evening, in a private chamber at the Foundation's headquarters, Charlotte stood before the board again. This time, with files spread before her like pieces of a broken mirror, each shard pointing back to Sterling. She laid down the document from Atlanta. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice unwavering, this is no longer a matter of mismanagement. It is a deliberate betrayal of this institution's mission, our donors' trust, and the memory of every family we've promised to protect. No one interrupted. Elaine stood next, confirming the document's authenticity. Charlotte's gaze swept the room. I'm asking for a vote of censure and a motion to begin legal proceedings for removal. One by one, the hands went up. 9 out of 10. Unanimous except for one board member on video who abstained to review the documents further. Still, it was done. As she walked out into the cool night air, the pendant warmed against her chest. Miles walked beside her, silent until they reached the car. You realize what you've done, he said finally. Yes, Charlotte said, turning her face to the sky. She could smell rain coming. I've started the ending, she said, and made room for something honest to begin. The wind off the harbor was sharp that morning, cutting through the moss-draped oaks as Charlotte made her way across the cobblestone square outside the courthouse. The city was quiet, gray, watching, as if it too was waiting to see how the story would end. She stepped inside the courthouse annex, her heels echoing on the marble. This wasn't a trial yet, but a legal review hearing had been fast-tracked after last night's board vote. The Foundation's attorneys were presenting evidence to determine if a formal case against Sterling Carlisle would proceed under the South Carolina Nonprofit Governance Act. Charlotte wasn't required to be present, but she came anyway. She sat quietly near the back of the room, hands folded in her lap, pendant cool against her skin. Miles sat beside her, nodding occasionally to familiar faces in the legal world. A few reporters sat near the side aisle, scribbling in notepads, stealing glances at her. She didn't flinch, not anymore. The hearing unfolded with calm professionalism. Elaine presented documents. A forensic accountant explained inconsistencies in the Foundation's property records. Charlotte watched Sterling's name swirl through the room like smoke, never present, but thick in the air. Halfway through the proceedings, a familiar figure entered the back of the room. Aubrey. She looked different, hair pulled back, no makeup, wearing a simple navy coat. But her eyes were resolute. She caught Charlotte's gaze across the room, then nodded, not asking permission, just affirming her place. When the hearing paused for recess, Charlotte stepped into the hallway, needing air. The walls felt too close, her breath too shallow. I didn't think you'd come, said a voice behind her. She turned. Aubrey stood a few feet away, arms crossed, not defensive, just cold from the drafty corridor. "I wasn't sure I would," Charlotte admitted, "but I'm glad you're here." Aubrey looked down. "I spent a long time pretending I didn't know who he really was. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could keep my place in his world. Turns out, I never had a place, just a price." Charlotte studied her. "You're braver than I was back then." "No," Aubrey said, her voice catching slightly. "You gave me the blueprint. I just followed it." For a moment, they stood there, two women who'd known the same man in very different ways. Bound not by bitterness, but by the choice to stop shrinking. Charlotte reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document. "This is a contact at a law clinic downtown. They help women untangle from things like this. If you need help, real help, they won't ask questions." Aubrey took it, her fingers trembling just slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Before either could say more, the door opened behind them. Douglas Hayes appeared, his face lined with urgency. "They're calling for you," he said to Charlotte. "Sterling just sent a formal objection to the board's authority to censure him. He's contesting your rights to the will." Charlotte's breath stilled. "He's challenging my father's original document?" Douglas nodded. "Claims it's forged." Miles, who had stepped up beside them, swore under his breath. "Of course he does." Charlotte's mind raced. "But we verified it. Legal notary, date-stamped files, multiple witnesses." Douglas held up a hand. "We're ready." "But they may want your testimony to clarify your knowledge of the will's origin." Charlotte glanced at Miles. "He's playing for delay." "And distraction," Miles added. "He's hoping to stir doubt, stall the press cycle." She turned to Douglas. "Bring me in. I won't be intimidated by paper." Inside the chamber, Charlotte took the witness chair with quiet grace. The panel of 3 legal examiners asked her to walk them through how she found the original will. Her voice never wavered. "It was hidden in a hollowed-out book in my father's study," she said. "He left it there on purpose. My father always believed the most important truths should be protected, not displayed." One of the panelists leaned forward. "Why wait until now to reveal it?" Charlotte inhaled. "Because I wanted to be sure I wasn't acting from grief, that I was protecting a legacy, not chasing vengeance." The room stilled. Elaine handed over notarized witness signatures. Miles submitted the original letter Charlotte's father had written, confirming the will's update before his passing. Sterling's objection, filed hours before, began to unravel. Charlotte stepped down from the witness chair, calm and centered. The woman who had walked into this building was still healing, but not hiding. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. A soft, golden warmth filtered down over the street, lighting the courthouse steps like a stage. As Charlotte and Miles stepped into the light, a small group of reporters turned, cameras ready. One called out, "Ms. Carlyle, any comment on the hearing today?" Charlotte paused. Then she turned. "Just this," she said, her voice clear. "Truth doesn't need a defense. It only needs the courage to be spoken." And then she walked on, not away, but forward. The late afternoon sky over Charleston burned in soft hues of amber and lavender, the kind of southern sunset that made the city feel frozen in time. But inside the Carlyle estate, now Charlotte's by both name and law, change moved like wildfire. The hearing had shifted everything. Sterling's objections were dismissed. The court had formally validated her father's will, reinstating Charlotte as the rightful trustee of the foundation and majority heir. It was quiet victory, announced without spectacle, but reverberating through the circles that once doubted her. Yet it didn't feel like triumph, not quite. Charlotte stood in the foyer, her hand resting lightly on the carved wood banister. The weight of the past few weeks settled over her shoulders like a quilt soaked in rain. She was free now, legally, financially, publicly, but freedom had its silence. And sometimes silence could ache louder than chains. The doorbell rang. Charlotte blinked out of her thoughts and crossed the tiled floor. She opened the door to find Miles standing there with a stack of documents and a hesitant smile. "I come bearing boring paperwork and 2 chocolate croissants," he said, holding up a small bakery bag like a peace offering. Charlotte exhaled a laugh, soft, tired, but genuine. "You had me at croissant." They moved into the study where the fire had already been lit, casting flickering shadows across the wall of books. Charlotte set a mug of tea in front of him and dropped into the armchair across the coffee table. Miles laid the papers down, but didn't touch them. She looked at him. "Something on your mind?" He hesitated. "I've been working with you for over a year," he began, voice low. "And in all that time, I thought I knew your strength. But what I saw in that hearing room, that wasn't just strength. That was something sacred." Charlotte glanced away, suddenly too aware of the way the firelight danced across the room, how warm and close the air felt. "Sacred is a big word, Miles," she said softly. "Well," he shrugged, "you earned it." A long silence stretched between them, not awkward, just full. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know this isn't the time for grand declarations," he said, eyes fixed on the floor. "And I don't want to confuse comfort with timing, but I need to say this." Charlotte looked at him, her heart tightening. "I never wanted to be just another man in your orbit," he continued. "Not someone who needed you to fall apart so I could step in and play savior. You saved yourself, and that's exactly why I—" He stopped himself, then met her gaze. "I care about you, Charlotte, not because of what you've been through, but because of who you became after." Her breath caught, not from shock, but from how right it felt to hear. "I don't need saving," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That's why I said it." They sat in the warmth, firelight flickering between them. Charlotte's mind ran back to her mother's pendant, now a familiar weight at her collarbone. Her father's words echoed again. "You were never meant to be small." She rose and walked to the window, looking out across the quiet yard. Then she turned back to him. "There's still so much to rebuild," she said. "I don't even know who I am outside of survival." Miles stood too. "Then let's find out together, slowly, honestly, no pressure." She nodded, something loosening in her chest. "I'd like that." He stepped closer, just enough to feel near without crowding her. As if reading the moment, Rosa called from the kitchen, breaking the quiet. "Ms. Charlotte, Ms. Althea's here." Charlotte blinked. "Althea?" Seconds later, Althea strode in, hair wrapped in a silk scarf, arms full of files. "I didn't want to interrupt whatever this is," she said with a raised eyebrow. "But we have a new issue." Charlotte stepped forward, instincts snapping back to focus. "What happened?" Althea handed her a manila folder. "It's about the land grant near the harbor, the same one Sterling tried to sell. A man named Franklin Coate just filed a claim saying he was promised exclusive access by Sterling. He's threatening to sue the Foundation for breach." Charlotte flipped open the folder, scanning the documents. Her pulse quickened. "That land is tied to the community redevelopment plan," she murmured. "If we lose it, we risk setting back 6 months of work." Miles stepped up beside her. "This is Sterling's last move, a backdoor play." Charlotte looked up. "Then we shut it down, cleanly, legally, and without giving him the satisfaction of scandal." She closed the folder with a sharp snap. "I've fought too hard to let ghosts write the ending." Althea smirked. "Now that's the Charlotte Carlyle I remember." Charlotte looked at both of them, her team, her Constance, and allowed herself a quiet smile. They weren't just fixing what was broken. They were building something better, together. Outside, dusk gave way to night. Inside, something new was taking root. The scent of spring drifted in from the open windows, jasmine, sea air, something clean and quiet that made Charlotte pause as she stood in the nursery, one hand resting gently on her rounded stomach. She was nearly 8 months along now, and everything in this room, the soft curtains, the vintage rocking chair, the carefully chosen books lining the low shelves, had been placed with intention. Outside, birds chirped in the oaks, and Spanish moss swayed in the golden light. Charleston was fully awake again, and this home, this place that had once felt like a stage set for someone else's life, now finally felt like her own. She heard the floorboards creak lightly behind her. "Are you sure about the color?" Miles asked, stepping into the room with a paint swatch in one hand and a smudge of green on his cheek. "It's technically called Thistle Morning, but I'd argue it leans Seafoam Afternoon." Charlotte laughed softly. "You're overthinking it again." "I can't help it. I'm emotionally invested in the wall." She stepped toward him and wiped the paint off his cheek with her thumb. "I love it, and I love that you care enough to ask." He looked at her for a long moment. Not the way men look at something beautiful. The way they look at something they fought to deserve. "I never thought I'd build a life here," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd belong." "You don't just belong," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "You're part of what made this possible." He kissed her knuckles, then placed her hand against his chest. "Every good thing I've found standing next to you." Charlotte swallowed the lump rising in her throat. It wasn't about romance, not just. It was about healing, about building a future not as a reaction to pain, but as a declaration of hope. Rosa stepped in just then, smiling broadly. "Sorry to interrupt your moment, but you've got a visitor." Charlotte raised a brow. "Aubrey?" "No, someone else," Rosa said. "You're not going to believe it." Downstairs, sunlight spilled across the entryway. A woman stood just inside the threshold, wearing an elegant linen coat and holding a newspaper in one hand. Sterling's mother. "Mrs. Carlyle," Charlotte said, measured but not unkind. "Cecilia, please," the woman said with a graceful nod. "I know I have no right to intrude, but I came to say something overdue." Charlotte said nothing, but gestured to the sitting room. Cecilia sat, composed and graceful even now. She held the newspaper forward. On the front page was a photo of Charlotte standing in front of the newly restored women's health clinic the foundation had helped open. The headline read, "Legacy Reclaimed. Charlotte Carlyle leads change in historic Charleston." "I read every word," Cecilia said softly. "And I realized I never truly saw you. I saw the woman I wanted you to be for my son. I never saw the woman you were." Charlotte nodded once, lips pressed tight. "My son is not well," Cecilia said carefully. "And I enabled that. For too long I looked the other way. I told myself you'd bring out the best in him." "I tried," Charlotte whispered. "But loving someone shouldn't cost you your reflection." "No, it shouldn't," Cecilia agreed, voice trembling. "And I came today not to ask forgiveness. I came to thank you for not becoming small even when everything around you tried to shrink you." There was a pause, a stillness, and then Charlotte nodded, not out of obligation, out of choice. "I appreciate your words," she said gently. "And I hope, wherever Sterling is now, he finds his own peace." Cecilia stood slowly, then surprised Charlotte by stepping forward and placing a small velvet box on the coffee table. "It belonged to your mother-in-law," she said. "But I think it was always meant for someone else." She left quietly. Inside the box was a brooch, a delicate magnolia, carved in pearl. Charlotte held it in her hand, feeling the weight of unspoken things, not forgiveness, but closure. That night, Charlotte stood on the porch, watching the stars blink open over the marsh. Miles came beside her, sliding his hand into hers. The lights of the city glowed softly in the distance, and behind them, the nursery sat ready, filled not just with things, but with hope. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. The noise, the chaos, the fight? Miles shook his head. No, I think we earned this silence. Charlotte nodded. It's strange, isn't it? How something can end so loudly, and yet peace arrives on tiptoe. He leaned in closer. What do you want this child to know most? She looked out at the dark water, at the shadows of oak branches swaying under moonlight. That no one, no legacy, no name, no past, can define their worth, she said. Yeah, and that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers, not this time. Inside, a lullaby played softly on a loop, the same one her father used to hum when she was a girl. Charlotte turned to Miles, eyes glinting with quiet certainty. I'm ready, she said. He smiled. So am I. And under the stillness of the southern sky, with the future stretching wide and waiting, they stood together, not as people haunted by what was lost, but as builders of what could now begin.